That's part of why it has only continued to be a success story, right? OnlyFans does not have any advertising, and they're very proud of this, and they'll tell you about it. Nobody advertises on OnlyFans that is not part of their business model.
Welcome to Burning Platforms, our fortnightly look at the intersection between tech and politics, brought to you by Capita's Centre of the Public Square. I'm Peter Lewis. This week we look at the business model behind the OnlyFans website with academic Emily van der Nagel. But first, our rundown of the latest news from around the world with our regular panel, Digital Rights Watch Chair Lizzie O'Shea and Health Engine CEO Dan Stinton. So welcome back to Burning Platforms. We're in our virtual cavern tonight. I've got my regular partners in crime, Lizzie O'Shea, joining me from the beautiful Chaise Lounge in Melbourne. Hi, Lizzie.
Hello, Peter.
And Dan, looking very dapper in his renovated Perth digs. G'day, Dan. And
G'day, Peter.
And we've got our special guest, Emily van der Nagel, who is a lecturer in social media at Monash Uni, who has been doing deep research into OnlyFans, which I guess is the academic equivalent of only reading Playboy for the articles. But g'day, Emily, and really looking forward to understanding your work and not just making cheap jokes about it as we deep dive later in the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. So look, let's start off with tech crime, which has been coursing over the news wires today. The founder of Telegram, Russian nationalist Pavel Durov, has been arrested in France on charges relating to the content on his encrypted app. So, Lizzie, 3 questions. What is Telegram? Who is Pavel Durov? And why should we care?
So Telegram is an app that is used by lots of terrible people on the internet. I think it's fair to say. So it has a light touch, and I'm using very exaggerated air quotes there, approach to content moderation. So it's meant that a lot of people use it for all sorts of really bad behavior on the internet, but also potentially and often illegal content. So things like sharing child sex abuse material, for example, or drug trafficking, these kinds of things. It's also been a place where groups organised, like on the far right, also been used by other people for very legitimate purposes, because there is a component of it that is protected by encryption. Not all of the app is protected by encryption, so only secret chats. So it is more like a social media platform than something like Signal, which is an encrypted end-to-end messaging app and does that very well, but is similar in that way to Telegram. But Telegram is much larger and broader than that, so facilitates kind of broadcasting, and people can subscribe to channels and the like. And it has been associated with lots of, bad behavior, like, Trump organises on there and broadcasts on there, and others from the far right do as well. There was claims that people were helping to organise some of the riots that were occurring in the UK recently, that kind of thing. So Pavel Durov has just been arrested. He's arrested in France, and he's also actually a French national. So he has been travelling around Europe, interestingly, but this is now this particular arrival in Paris has resulted in an arrest. And it's not entirely clear what's going on. There has been a statement released, but it's not clear whether he'll be released after 3 days, which is the maximum amount of time that he can be held, but we'll see. But there was speculation this was because of the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, which have recently been introduced into Europe and come into force. But in fact, what it looks like is basically allegations by the French government of failure to moderate content, particularly child sex abuse material, pro-terror content, this kind of thing. And there's also looks like a charge in there for using encryption without a license, which I'm not sure I fully understand.
So that's a good thing, right? Is it a good thing that somebody who's not taking responsibility for their platform is being held to account?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. So lots of people don't like Telegram, what goes on there, and I understand that. You know, it's not that dissimilar to something like 4chan, which is awful as well. I do remain a little bit concerned about this, however, because I do sort of wonder what comes next after Telegram. Because if there are allegations, particularly around the use of encryption and a requirement from government authorities to have the capacity to moderate content and across the entirety of the platform, so therefore really saying that you can't have end-to-end encrypted messaging on an online app, then I think that does call into question what will be the future of other similar apps like Signal, for example, but others that do offer this service. I mean, WhatsApp as well offers end-to-end encryption. Facebook has been trying to put in place end-to-end encryption on their messaging service internally to Facebook, and they have been butting up against a lot of difficulties doing that, not least of which government's trying to stop them doing it. And so it is this kind of circumstance where major platforms are discouraged from putting in place end-to-end encryption, even though it's more secure, because of concerns about access to law enforcement around this kind of content. Telegram's a bit different from others because it does allow for a community developed, you know, it's a social media platform where broadcasting happens and subscriptions happen. It has an advertising business model, for example. So it's not clearly just about privacy and encryption of communications, and that's what's being attacked. They do engage in a form of content moderation that is a hands-off policy. So it's not as though there's no policy. They've deliberately taken a choice there. But I do worry whether this becomes the precedent for other kinds of, I think, more upstanding end-to-end encryption services coming under attack on a similar basis, that they're not able to properly moderate content, including for illegal content, and they're going to be held responsible for it. Telegram's response is that this is kind of preposterous that a CEO of a platform like this would be held responsible for what goes on the platform. And that does feel a bit like a kind of American approach to this, which is the position in American law. But you do wonder whether that's going to hold with Europeans who have a different view, and what we're going to see happen to other platforms that use end-to-end encryption.
Dan,
do
what
you think it's a good or a bad thing? Yeah.
I'm still trying to work it out. Like, Dan, what do you reckon?
I think this is a welcome development. I think that Telegram is in this really sort of half-pregnant situation where it's got all of the downsides of a social media platform and yet isn't facilitating the good things that you're worried about, I think, Lizzie. So just a couple of examples. So as you mentioned, Lizzie, they've got an advertising revenue stream, right? And so therefore they are motivated to keep engagement on the platform. And as we've talked about lots, generally the more controversial the content, the more engagement you're going to get. So that's a fundamental problem with it, and makes it different to Signal in a lot of ways.
But what are they advertising off? They're doing ads on their money laundering or something, are they? Or that'd be a model.
I'm not sure if they're that brazen, but maybe you can suggest that to their recently incarcerated CEO. But the other big difference is that they allow unlimited group sizes in their chats, and that compares with. I went and had a look at this in the lead up to this conversation. So WhatsApp, I think, allows 1,024 people in their group chats. Not sure why there's 1,024, but nonetheless, Google Chat 400, Twitter 256, Facebook Messenger 250, and right down the bottom, Apple iMessage is 32. And I think so. As a result of that, I just think that's a very irresponsible policy to have when you allow unlimited group chats, because the potential for harm is massive. You've got this motivation to keep people engaged no matter what. You've got unlimited group sizes. You're deliberately telling all of your community of users that you're not going to moderate the content, and yet the potential for harm of that content and for it to reach a massive audience is way larger than on any of the other comparable platforms. So I love that a CEO is being held responsible for not taking their responsibilities seriously. And I think that this is probably what I would like to see the start of more of, is CEOs actually being held accountable for the harms that take place on their platform, and using the whole free speech or we don't pry into your content privacy regime just doesn't hold when you get to a scale of the size of an app like Telegram, in my view anyway. So, but what do others think?
What do you reckon, Emily?
The thing is that it seems like Telegram is really offering so many things on its platform that could be used for such good, So it's kind of really disappointing that this is the way it's gone, because I feel like strong encryption, the absence of content moderation. Like, I know that this has actually led to a lot of really, like, objectively bad content on the platform. But I feel like if only those things were used for better ends, they could be really powerful.
But isn't that like a digital version of the tragedy of the commons? If only everyone was nice, then we wouldn't need rules.
I guess it's like, we certainly wouldn't need rules around stuff like copyright. If people were just respectful of each other's content and used it properly and, enjoyed it for their own personal use and didn't sell it, etc. Like, that would be great. But that's not the world that we live in.
Yeah. But Lizzie, is it also the disconnect between the purpose of a platform and then the people that use it? Like, what's your average Telegram user and why are they there?
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument that they're really there because they can't find places to organise in other mainstream social media platforms, of course.
Because there's bloody rules.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. The other thing is, though, there are rules that currently exist in content moderation policies in mainstream social media platforms that are bad. There are voices that are being suppressed at the moment that, pro-Palestine voices in various iterations of Facebook and the like. This is an accusation that's been thrown around. I mean, obviously the right in the US is obsessed with being sidelined on social media as well. But there's real questions around the policies that do exist. There's been a lot of discussion around things like whether social media platforms worked to suppress information about or anti-vaxxer information or vaccination side effects and stuff, whether they worked hand in glove with governments to do that. Now, that may be a legitimate content moderation decision, but it wasn't done transparently. And I do think there is a question around what good content moderation looks like, because it can look like different things to different people, whether you're in government trying to put out a particular policy, whether you're a human rights defender in an authoritarian regime, whether you're a movement that is sidelined in mainstream society. These things, these people deserve to have a platform they can use, of course, but that does come with significant downsides, including the capacity for these platforms to be used for criminal behaviour. So I don't know, I just remain a bit concerned about this being a precedent used for other opportunities to crack down or to create a certain culture of content moderation that does continue to marginalise certain sets of people. And those people are very difficult. They're already struggling to get their voice heard, so they're very difficult to kind of defend in public life. And that's my worry. I have no real sympathy for the business model.
But criminals and child porn rings are a marginalized group, or like
No.
I mean, this is where I find
totally. I understand
your starting point and my starting point are somewhat different, because I think you tend to the libertarian online a bit more than me. But how do you build a platform based on the expectation of people doing the best things when human behavior suggests the opposite?
Well, also what I would say about online safety, and particularly the spread of child sex abuse material, which of course is abhorrent, as is pro-terror content, is that some of the discussions we have about this is about the capacity to spread it without thinking about the capacity to recruit people to that cause. And if you talk to online safety people, of which there is a community of people who've often worked in major platforms, who have a body of practice, who are developing kind of norms and skills around how you manage these issues, because they're massively complex. One of the things they do talk about is recruitment rather than spreading, because there's different ways into the problem, and often law enforcement public discussions focus on one and not the other, and that is potentially a problem, I think, because it not even just a public policy problem, but then it also means that in situations like this there's a focus on encryption when in fact that may not be merited, or also may bring into scope other things that are quite useful. So I don't really want to have a whole war about whether encryption is a good or bad thing again, and I think it's possible to have an argument about why Telegram is bad without doing that. I remain a bit concerned that's not the discussion we're going to have.
All right, well, let's move on. I was going to talk about a report our friends at APRA have released this week detailing the impact of AI on the music industry. Now, we've spoken about, AI in the in respect to screenwriting a number of times, particularly with Claire Pullen a few episodes ago. But APRA is looking particularly at what it's going to do to musicians based on a survey of more than 4,000 musicians. I think the findings are interesting in that half of the musicians are using AI as a tool in their work, but they also recognise it's going to do real damage to their livelihood. So it's not kind of everything's bad. It's trying to work out a way of negotiating that. They've used some smart modelling to come up with the grand sum of $500 million a year in income being at risk. And that's in an industry which has already seen streaming kill the old income models. So there's a range of measures APRA is calling for, including disclosure of content that's already been used, i.e. stolen, a tightening of copyright, and the watermarking of AI content. So I'm just really interested in what the rest of you think about this approach, particularly pivoting back to copyright as one of the anchors for protecting the rights of artists. But I think also around that idea of using the watermarking technology so that consumers have informed choice over the way their content is produced. You mentioned copyright before, Emily. Do you want to kick this one off? What's your view? Did you see the report and do you have a view on it?
Yeah, so I'm not a musician, but I'm really.
But look at your backdrop suggests
my husband's
otherwise.
the musician. But I think that there, like a lot of other industries, there are already a lot of digital tools that that creatives are using. From my context, the threat of artificial, generative artificial intelligence is that we have such sophisticated large language models that students at universities are able to produce really compelling looking written assignments, and that's a whole issue that the entire sector is grappling with.
Isn't just the tell if it says on the one hand, but on the other hand, you know that it's come from ChatGPT.
Yeah, but there are certain like ChatGPT words that are coming through. Delve is a huge one. Something delving into the exciting world of social media. I'm looking at that really hard, but it's not always easy to tell, when a student has used generative AI, the way that this works in music, I think, is yet another layer of difficulty, because there is, I've seen a few of the artist statements from the APRA report, and musicians are saying things like making music is something really fundamental to our humanity. Like we shouldn't automate that, and it's a real threat that so much more music now can be automated. And so I wonder if, especially in a kind of copyright realm, Lizzie probably knows more about this, what happens if we already do kind of have a context in which AI is not necessarily yet widespread in the music industry? Maybe it is, I don't know, but certainly we've had things like artificial and digital tools that have helped generate sounds and generate entire genres of music that are digitally driven instead of people playing instruments. So I wonder if that sets up some kind of precedent for what's happening now in the generative AI space.
What do you reckon, Lizzie?
Well, I mean, I sort of have a slightly different take on this topic to others, in the sense that I do think we need to find ways to allow people to make music in a sustainable fashion. And, it is part of our humanity. And it's, even if I don't really make music anymore, I used to a long time ago, I want others to be doing it, because it's a collective cultural activity, even if you're not doing it directly. And there are other solutions to this than just relying on...
What was your instrument? I picture a harp or something.
No, I was a choral singer for a very long time. Took me around the world many times. It was a very useful skill to have. So that was fun. But what I would say is that, in Norway, for example, I think it's Norway, maybe one of the other Nordics, if you write a book, the government buys 1,000 copies and puts them in every library in Norway. And you can sort of understand how we sort of need a similar regime here, something where the government kind of incentivizes people to do this work. It doesn't necessarily subsidize it directly, but it gives people the opportunity to spend time doing it and experimenting. And that's one way in which you can create a creative culture. And I sort of see that as something that we should be focusing on, positive opportunities for people to make music, notwithstanding there may be technical ways to get around giving people the proceeds of their creative work, just because I feel like it is such a challenging problem. It's like it's a competition problem, it's an enforcement problem, it's a digital platform problem. Like there's so many challenges with trying to pull that genie back in, and I'm up for that. But in the interim, until that kind of that policy landscape changes, and maybe some of these big AI companies are held to account for taking creative works, we can also focus on how we can create the conditions for people to make this, notwithstanding there may be no market that is profitable for a return on that investment, because it's not really a product, like it's a cultural artifact that we all benefit from. Anyway, so that's the kind of thinking that I would like to see, as opposed to just a reversion to kind of copyright as being the key mechanism and our key understanding of how we get value from cultural products.
Yeah, I'm also concerned, Dan, that we end up in how do we regulate this, where the other side is, as consumers, are we prepared to cop stuff that passes as music, which has just been a button, and whether that piece about watermarking, you almost end up with the equivalent of organic cultural food. And if you're going to buy music, or if you're going to, I don't think you're going to go to a concert to watch an AI. Maybe
people go to concerts to watch DJs, Peter.
Yeah, but there's still people pushing, I don't know, pushing the buttons. I don't know, Dan. What do you reckon? Like, would you listen to AI generated music?
About 5 years in my youth,
and that's just pushing buttons, isn't it, Dan?
It is, but it was amazing how long I got away with it for. And I don't know if I'd be able to now. Anyway, Peter, I think I'm with you. I think the watermarking component of this is really important to me, and perhaps I'll say something which Emily, you might disagree with, but I'm not that troubled with students using OpenAI or any of these other tools in order to create an essay. I think that this is ultimately going to be a net benefit for society, because it's just going to make us our ability to efficiently produce new output, I guess, go to a higher level. Now, I know there's trade-offs for that. I know that you want students to be able to learn and then to think for themselves. And obviously, if they're just typing things into a chatbot, they're not doing that. But I think on the whole, this is just going to become such a normal part of how we operate that I think we just better get used to it and learn how to use it. And I also think that there's so many benefits from the generative component of artificial intelligence, which I'm deploying in my business, and millions of people around the world are as well. And I'm using AI for personal things as well, like using Gemini to search through old emails that I wanted to find and all kinds of things. So there's all these, that component of it, I'm all for and I welcome. But when it delves into the there's that word, when it delves into the creativity component, I'm just really troubled by it. And this is where I think, putting aside the copyright argument, which I'm equally troubled with, but I think having an obligation for this kind of creative output to have some kind of indication to people that it is artificially generated is really important. Now, probably for the vast majority of people, they're not going to care. And those people probably listen to Britney Spears or other terrible music and think that that's okay. I hope I'm not offending anyone on this podcast. But there are, I think, a sizable bunch of people that will just reject it on principle, because music is so much more than just what it sounds like and the frequencies that make you feel good or not. I think we touched on this at South by Southwest last year, but one of the music subcultures that I was obsessed with, I went down various rabbit holes in my youth, but one of them was grunge in the early 1990s from Seattle. And it was as much about the story of the bands and the scene that happened there that made you fall in love with it and made you fall in love with it. And I just can't see an AI subculture with that much richness being developed. And so I think just the ability to giving the consumers the ability to determine what is genuinely human created with the depth that comes with that and what is artificially created, I think is a really important starting point. Maybe I'm in a vanishingly small minority of people that are going to give a shit about that, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I think we polled it at some stage, and it was like over 50% of young people said they'd be totally fine with AI generated music and other forms of culture as well. So maybe we are holding on to something, but I do feel that it'd be a pretty sad world if you just pushed a button on the music. There's at least something there if there's a creator or a choralist, Lizzie. Like, can we get you singing at some point? I feel like we've been missing something.
How did I not know this, Lizzie?
I know, me either.
Sorry to go down a bit of a rabbit hole, but that is a very important piece of information that I feel like I should have known about several years ago.
Not really, but the good thing about, I mean, this might shock you, but the thing I like about it is that you don't have to sing on your own. And like you actually blend into the crowd. So, you know, if the note was too high, just tap out. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I didn't always tap out for my chorister colleagues who might be listening to this. Seems unlikely.
It wouldn't surprise you that I got through school choir by mouthing. I got caught once. I could not hold a tune.
You were lip syncing in choir.
Like an AI. Dan, let's talk about your previous career, and without wanting to give you any triggers. The News Media Bargaining Code looks like it's coming to a shaky conclusion to its time in Australia, at least with our friends at Meta. So obviously there's now talk about what replaces it, if anything, and I think there is serious talk around some form of tech tax. If there's any industry group with the heft to lobby for a tax just for them, it's probably the media industry. Is that a good policy outcome? Is it realistic that government would bend to the needs of the media? And if so, you know, what do you think it would look like? Would it just be another pot of money, or could it be done better?
Yeah, no, I think it's a terrible idea. So Lizzie and I can spar on this just one more time with feeling. So yeah, look, this story was I guess it's been in the media a lot, but it was particularly sparked by an opinion piece by my former colleague Paul Karp, who's the chief political correspondent for The Guardian. And look, the context of this article was the Gambling Advertising Review, which is nearing its conclusion now, and where the government has had, federal government has had recommendations that gambling advertising should effectively be banned on most channels. And the government has effectively, instead of taking that recommendation and running with it, has instead decided to put a cap on the amount of, or it looks like at least they're going to put a cap on the amount of gambling advertising that can take place. And Bill Shorten, credit to him, was pretty honest about the reasons for that in a piece where he basically said, well, if you take away the gambling advertising revenue from free-to-air TV stations in particular, they're going to struggle to survive because of the dominance of Google and Facebook. So anyway, all of that is sort of the background, if you like, and it's coming at the same time that the deals that were struck by myself and many others about 3 years ago with Facebook and Google are coming up for renewal off the back of the News Media Bargaining Code debate. Facebook has said that they will not be renewing those deals. That's not a surprise. I think we've spoken about it before. Google have been less forthright, but have indicated on a couple of occasions that they don't intend to renew the deals, at least at the same level. So they're going to be substantially less money. So that's going to put even more pressure on.
Why would they?
Well, this is the thing. They wouldn't, because the pressure is no longer on them, and it, by all indications, it looks like Labor is not going to apply the pressure that would come from properly implementing the News Media Bargaining Code. So look, there's been a number of discussions for a number of years around a better model for funding the media, such as a digital services tax. But I hate it for I think 2 or 3 reasons. Firstly, I think it's problematic because it potentially runs foul of the free trade agreement between us and the US. And even if it doesn't, I think it gives an opportunity for Google and Facebook to run interference legally on its implementation. It also, I just have a fundamental problem with the government collecting a whole bunch of money and then distributing that to media companies. Now, I know that there are models which you can make that at arm's length. I know that you can do it better, but I don't think it's ever going to be perfect. And I think it does risk that, you know, the coalition government somehow finding a way to influence that the Australian, for example, gets more funding, and then Labor gets in power, and Miles stomping around the Guardian gets more money. And I just think
Labor gets in power and News Limited would still get more money.
Maybe right. Maybe the Guardian loses out in any circumstance. But I guess, look, last point. My biggest problem with this is that I think it fails to recognise the fundamental issue that the News Media Bargaining Code was trying to address. And that is, it's not a copyright issue. It's not a charity. It is the fact that the media companies are competing with Google and Facebook for advertising dollars, and yet are completely reliant on them for traffic from the internet, with Google reaching, I think, 90-something% of the population and Facebook reaching about 80. So you have this market failure where media companies are effectively forced to compete with companies that they are fundamentally reliant on for their own survival. And therefore, I just think it's got holes all over it. I think the mechanism that was devised at the time is the right one. A better solution is simply you go, okay, well, now you've got must-carry obligations, Google and Facebook, and you have to carry news content on your platform. It is your responsibility to do so when you reach that many people, and enter into a deal. And if you don't, we're going to arbitrate as was originally designed. So that would be my preference. Fire at will.
Oh, I just find this funny because it feels like we disagree.
This is like how we met.
And we're still friends, I hope.
Prequel to the prequel. I just much prefer the idea of government taking the money than, major media companies just giving it straight to their shareholders when they get it from the News Media Bargaining Code, which is what we saw, like no strings attached money from social media platforms straight into the pockets. Like not clear that significant portions went to investment in journalism. Like The Guardian is the exception there, right? So the News Media Bargaining Code had its own structural problem, and it's funny that we have the opposite reaction to that. You perceive it as a benefit, I perceive it as a problem. I mean, I think it's hugely disappointing that journalism is dependent on advertising, and then we look for solutions that are also dependent on advertising in the way that you described. So I'd much prefer to say, well, actually, in fact, the problem is that they're competing with for attention with social media platforms. So that's where the tax can come from. And these are hugely profitable businesses which don't seem to fully have a social license to operate, or there's at least a sense that they're too profitable for the kinds of problems they create. So here's one problem we can try to solve through taxing them. I think that makes a lot more sense as a public narrative than the News Media Bargaining Code did personally. And so, look, I mean, the free trade issue is a real problem, and I think that agreement is a real problem, and the idea that major platforms will run interference is a problem, but that's always true. So I think we do need to find ways to hold these companies to account, notwithstanding they're not headquartered in Australia, and this is one of the few methods available, and it's imperfect. I would sort of prefer to see tax just go to lots of things that are important that are in the public interest, not just media, but whatever. That's a gripe that we can get to later if it ever gets this far. But I think it is pretty telling that stark comment from Bill Shorten, the only politician prepared to tell the truth on this, that the problem with gambling and restricting advertising is that it does compromise the capacity for mainstream media organisations to survive. Well, let's fix that problem and not make mainstream media dependent on the misery of millions of people who spend in Australia. Australians lose more per capita than any other country in the world to gambling, and this is somehow justified as a business model for mainstream media. So let's just have a debate about the real topics is what I would prefer. About sustainability of journalism, I'm up for that. And let's figure out a way to fund it. This seems as good a one as any.
Emily, from the cheap seats?
From the cheap seats, I'm not. I'm not generally against the idea of enormous tech companies that make billions and billions of dollars off the human misery that is staring at my tiny screen all day, and turning it into something that has a kind of civic application, right? But I know that it's not as easy as that. But I agree with Lizzie in terms of news has more value than just what advertisers can squeeze out of it. And I feel like if we had in Australia a much better funded national broadcaster, for starters, that would be a really excellent place to begin. Journalism has just been squeezed from so many different angles, and at the same time as you see journalism as an industry rapidly shrinking and having to go in all kinds of directions to try to get more and more eyeballs, not recognizing the value of journalism as a completely civic priority and something really fundamental to being in a society, I think is where we've really gone wrong. I don't know if there was a way to take some of those tech billions and channel them into the kind of journalism that really helps us with our civic priorities, then that would be fantastic. Is that how this is going to work? Not really.
It feels like the whole thing, again, a lot of this is inventing a world we wish we had rather than the world we have. I've been reading Eric Beecher's book on the men who broke the news, and I think one of his pieces, which I don't know if you've read it, Dan, and I know he was on the opposite side to you in the news media bargaining code discussion as well, but as long as there is basically no, the whole idea of a fourth estate holding power to account works up until the point in which no one holds the fourth estate to account. And I think the bit that's interesting in the idea of some sort of tech tax is the idea of Anya Schiffrin, who's has been out in Australia, who is a media academic from the States, that the ground rules on what would be, it wouldn't be giving it to your mates, but what do you need to do to get access to those funds could create that degree of accountability that we've never seen in the media.
So it sounds like, Peter, you're no longer in favour of the news media bargaining code. Where do you sit?
I just don't think that it. I think it delivered short term. It was a short term fix. I think it. I just feel that the way that the media companies, with the exception of The Guardian, used that public support and then undermined the rest of the digital platforms' inquiry recommendations, including privacy, including disinformation, sort of has dealt them out of actually arguing broader public interests. Like even the good media companies are purely doing it for money, not for any broader public interest, in my view.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that, and it's I think the reason why one of the main reasons why there's probably such little support for this to continue now is because of that exact fact. But I guess I would just come back to that. I think that there are ways to improve the bargaining code. A must-carry obligation to stop Facebook throwing their toys out of the pram, as they have done in Canada and did briefly in Australia, is one. Forcing some transparency and accountability of the money from these deals being invested back into public interest journalism is another. And I think that way you're going to have the market figuring it out, which would be my preference. Just last point. I am actually in favour of a digital services tax. I just don't think that the money should necessarily be used for this that is collected from it. I think it can be used for other things.
Anyway, as always, we spent too long talking about the media when we should be talking about Emily's work. So, Emily, what are you doing hanging out on OnlyFans? Why are you interested in it? And why is it of interest to people that may not usually be on that platform?
It's a great question. I feel like sometimes because I am an academic studying OnlyFans, that probably I should make an OnlyFans, but the idea would just be to, make videos talking about my research. Because
how do you reckon that would go?
Look, could go spectacularly. We never know. I'm a little bit
popular.
I'm a little bit nervous to try it. I think because look, here's the thing: when somebody says that they want to make an OnlyFans, what is being implied there is porn, right? And so OnlyFans is a platform that markets itself as just another subscription service, right? It is a company that at every turn downplays its association with not safe for work, adult material, pornography, nudity, and it constantly, in all of its slick branding, says
just full of academics talking about us. Yeah,
it might be.
You could be the poster child.
I know. Yeah, maybe that would actually that would help them communicate what they're for. But look, for all of OnlyFans, insisting that it is simply a way to monetize a fan base by offering paid content for people, it has an undeniable association with pornography. I think so much so that the platform itself absolutely refuses to talk about how much of its content is porn, because we all know that the answer is basically all of it.
So this is why I'm interested in talking to you, Emily, because I find your work fascinating in the sense that so much of what happens on the internet is related to sex. And I think everybody knows it, the amount of traffic associated with pornography, but also things like OnlyFans. But it's sort of unspoken about in some ways. Although I would note OnlyFans did at one point try to change its policy around not safe for work content and then had to quickly reverse it because it was clear that it's not, the platform would have probably struggled for financial viability without it. But the conversations, they're not conversations we actually normally have or are had with people who study it in a reflective way. Usually the discussions are kind of very knee-jerk from, you know, politicians trying to promote a particular policy that's simplistic and prudish. And I think your work is really interesting because it does try to put both users of the platforms and people who, you know, provide content for the platforms and get them within the line of sight of researchers to try and understand what's going on. And so I just want to ask you, what were some of the most surprising things when you talk to users of these platforms, or things that you didn't expect to find out when you started doing this kind of research? I mean, obviously not just OnlyFans as well. You research all sorts of other things.
Yeah, thank you, Lizzie. That's a really great question. I think what surprised me, I guess I went into my interviewing, right, because I wanted to speak with Australian people who were either making content on OnlyFans or selling content on OnlyFans. Either making content or buying content. So in talking to those people, I guess I had some kinds of gender assumptions, for example, that when I was speaking to creators that they would be overwhelmingly female, and that when I was talking to subscribers that they would generally be men. And actually within the pool of content creators, there was such refreshing variety. There was, for example, one of the interviews I did was with a truck driver in Perth who was driving his truck while he was talking to me, propped his phone up on the dash.
While making OnlyFans content?
No, while he was driving his truck. No, he had clothes on. Was doing Zoom interviews, and it was really just fascinating to hear him unpack his OnlyFans journey, which had really begun with various kind of swinging forums on Reddit. So he was part of it still is, I guess, you know, part of a really vibrant swinging community in Perth, and it was those online discussions and trying to meet up with people and you know, do partner sharing and whatever that actually got him talking about OnlyFans, because there were some people, there was an overlap, a little one, between the swinging community and people creating content for OnlyFans. And it was really interesting just to hear him talk about, you know, like, it's a bit of fun, it adds an extra angle to, you know, the kind of pleasures and joys of swinging, and also for him the kind of money it was earning him was you know, beer money. He was just like, yeah, we might use it to fix up one of our rooms in our house, do the renovation, get a little bit of a holiday. But certainly it was like a side income. It was something fun. It was an extra layer on top of you know, some sexual practices that he was already involved with. So I guess that surprised me.
So what are you going into this research with a thesis you're exploring, or are you're just asking questions? And if it's the latter, how do you present yourself to people?
So the idea of this research project is that I've been studying for a long time the way that people you know, use, negotiate, work with social media identities in different ways. I'm maybe unlike Dan, I'm a very strong advocate for online anonymity and pseudonymity, and I feel like though it's really crucial to internet and especially social media culture that people don't have to use their real names and faces. And people
I see why Lizzie got you on. I see it's basically so you can all have me surrounded.
Yeah, that's it. That's what she said to me, you know.
You wish, Dan.
Whereas Lizzie said to Emily, if you want to do some research, Dan's available for a discussion.
Yeah, Lizzie emailed me and said, let's get him. So it's always been an interest of mine, and something that I am passionate about, that it is, really fundamental to the vibrancy of our social media culture, that we do have the capacity to basically contextualize our identity. People are just different when they're with their friends, when they're at work, when they're hanging out after work, when they're trying to organize a Friday night of swinging for themselves and their wife as a thing that they really enjoy before they head back to their job as a truck driver. And those kinds of identity facets have always been really fascinating to me, and I enjoy exploring them. And I've found in this research area that it's always when it comes to sexual cultures, not safe for work stuff, nude stuff, like for me, that's where all of the most interesting and valuable case studies come from, because just like we were talking about before with Telegram, right? The idea that allowing free reign over what people can post on this platform has given rise to so many unpleasant, upsetting, illegal, awful things. But just imagine if it was used for something really positive, if you could take internet freedom, and that could mean that people could pursue things that are really deeply authentic to themselves, and that are fun, and things that really light them up, and things that they find pleasurable.
That all makes sense until you say the end point of that is porn. And I'm not prude, I've got no problem with porn, but then surely there's more to it than that. Freedom.
There's more to freedom than porn?
Yeah. Or is that it?
No, but
that's all, Peter.
That's all. No, what I'm suggesting is that internet freedoms. I think when we talk about social media platforms in the sense of things like content moderation, right? The idea is that every platform moderates. There are always rules for what you can and can't post, and often those rules tend to be really restrictive around certain kinds of self-expression and content. And what I'm suggesting is that the kinds of platforms that are really intent on squashing and deleting and deplatforming sexual content are also the ones really not doing a good job of moderating in other areas.
So just on that then, Emily, so by the way, as an aside, I think there's actually lots of common ground between your point around context of identity than more than we would think, but that's another talk show. One of the things that I like about OnlyFans is that it is empowering for the content creators in a way that so many other platforms are not. So, whether it's the major porn sites or whatever that benefit largely from advertising, and the creators of the content or the performers in the content don't benefit, or I guess on less exotic content generated, but certainly on the social media platforms, there's a huge amount of advertising revenue being generated by these content creators, which largely the benefit of that goes to the platforms themselves and not to the actual creators. Now, there's varying degrees on that. Some platforms are better than others, but still the overwhelming benefit goes to the platform and not to the creators themselves. One of the things that seems to be, at least my perception of OnlyFans, tell me if I'm kidding myself, is that it is a way for, yes, porn and adult film stars, but for a lot of them to earn money directly from their audience in a way that isn't possible when there's these big sort of platforms in the way, or the major studios in the way on the creation of the content. So isn't that ultimately a good thing? Isn't that empowering for the individuals, regardless of what kind of content it's producing? Isn't that a step in the right direction?
In terms of what OnlyFans good for?
Yeah, in terms of the fact that it's giving the creators more power and the ability to earn on their own terms in a way that so many other platforms don't.
Oh, absolutely. I do. I think that's a huge part of its appeal, and why that it has that's part of why it has only continued to be a success story, right? OnlyFans does not have any advertising, and they're very proud of this. And they'll tell you about it. Nobody advertises on OnlyFans that is not part of their business model, because what they have is, people who are prepared to pay for content, which is very different to a lot of other industries, including news. But what we have here is a platform that prides itself on taking a 20% cut of all of the payments that come through for its content creators. But it is of course, a huge part of the appeal is that content creators can make the content that they want to create. That's the setup, at least. Look, there's lots more to say about the dynamics of the porn industry, and potentially even content creators getting into a content level, a nudity level perhaps that's comfortable for them, and having that compromised by more demands from their audience potentially, or the kind of pressure to keep things going, keep it fresh, get more and more nude, more and more explicit. There are those dynamics for sure. I don't think any sort of technology is like empowering for women or other kinds of creators in a really straightforward way. But there are aspects to this model that I think are really great. Even though I'm not suggesting that OnlyFans is somehow, has somehow come along and single-handedly solved the whole problem of what a good platform looks like. I don't think it's a good platform. But I do think that the kind of subscription model that it allows to flourish there has been used in a lot of instances for people to really get at things that they truly love. I've spoken to creators who completely rely on OnlyFans for their entire income, and they have a blast. They enjoy making content. They feel like they have a really good rapport with a lot of their fans. They feel a freedom there. They feel a lot of joy and a lot of pleasure, and they get to explore a lot about themselves that they love. That's not true for every creator on the platform, for sure, but I do think that we can see a lot of positives in this kind of content. And that rings true for subscribers. When I talk to subscribers as well, it's very common that they will tell me that they see OnlyFans as a kind of ethical porn. The more that we hear about horrific conditions in other kinds of, porn and sex work industries, I think the more that resonates with people who are looking for better parts, not perfect parts of porn and sex work, but better parts of the industry and platforms where they too can kind of join in on the idea that here are women making the things that they want to make, the things that they find interesting and fun and sexy and pleasurable. And isn't that the sexiest thing of all?
So can I ask you to talk a little bit though, Emily, about some of those pressures, one of those pressures being that you have to do a lot of chatting to your fans, for example. And I reckon Peter will be interested in this because he became mildly obsessed after a fortnight ago talking with Jeannie Patterson about AI companions. But you were telling me about how increasingly...
Are you trying to push me onto this platform, Lizzie, to talk to people?
No, wait till you hear the end of the question. Well, increasingly... that people making content, producing content on OnlyFans or other platforms as well, started using automated tools to scale up the kind of content delivery that they do, including chatting, and whether that's something that also subscribers know about or feel differently about. And I'm interested to know if you can... I'll go on, Peter. What are you going to say?
No, that's really interesting. Keep going. Sorry.
How do subscribers react to it as well as producers? And I'm keen to hear more about what you've learnt in your course of studying this.
Yeah, that's it's a great point to hone in on the chatting, because on OnlyFans, firstly, what I'm arguing about OnlyFans is that it does not exist as a platform on its own, and it knows that. OnlyFans operates deliberately as an additional paid layer across existing social media platforms. You can't search for people on OnlyFans. You don't go to OnlyFans and then start thinking, now who will I follow? Because they don't really offer much in the way of discovery. Discovery happens on social media, and there is a fascinating culture around how people build audiences and then direct them to OnlyFans, particularly on platforms that are, for example, Instagram and TikTok, where adult content and nudity is completely forbidden. There is a whole language around hinting, suggesting, winking, nudging. Hey, do you want to check out a link? And we see this, we come across this variously. I was going to say you've probably come across this in your own feeds, but maybe it's just my feeds because this is the kind of thing
The
that I look at.
algorithm's got you pinged.
It sure does. They know what I want, sexy ladies. And you know, and I've seen lots of different winks and nudges and hints. Yeah, for example, and also, you know, through talking to my participants, what I ask them sometimes is, how do you know that somebody has an OnlyFans? And they'll say things to me like, oh, link in bio is a good one. And I'm like, that's really, like, link in bio can mean so many things. And they're like, oh, no. If you see a link tree, where you go to the link tree, you look at what else it's linking to. There are so many conventions around the hinting of an OnlyFans account that I find really fascinating. One other one, for example, is yes, I've got one, which is like in someone's bio, yes, I've got one, the phrase, which is a little hint to suggest that either there's a link tree with a link to OnlyFans, or potentially they're hinting that you can simply go to OnlyFans and enter the same username that they have on TikTok or on Instagram. I feel like at one, like there was a point in my research where I really thought, okay, I have started to see with the OnlyFans gaze, if you will, because at one point I was on TikTok. There was a very popular like what I wore today kind of meme. And I'd seen a couple of iterations. I was kind of enjoying, you know, seeing people's outfits. It's a nice little way to scroll through TikTok. I saw one person using the same TikTok sound that I'd already seen on a number of other videos. And I just noticed the way that her breasts were bouncing in her top. And I was like, they're not just accidentally doing that, are they? This is a hint. And nothing was said
like
about
semaphore with the breasts, like
they were just really lusciously jiggly, in a way that I could only interpret as a kind of deliberate signal. And I was like, I just had a feeling. And I think this is where I was like, okay, maybe, you know, I've been
spending a bit long on.
Yeah, I've been investigating this platform for a while now. So maybe I just knew. But I was, you know, just curious enough to enter that person's username that they were using on TikTok into OnlyFans. Yep, there it was. Very interesting that the hint can be as subtle as that. Like there is, you know, people say things like, have a look at my spicy account, or, you know, I've got a page on OnlyFriends, or, you know, stuff like that. But sometimes there's not even that textual element. It's just something that makes you think, what if I
tell us about the chatting.
Sorry, that wasn't even your question. So chatting. So when people, so a big part, thank you, Lizzie, for getting me back on track. A big part of finding somebody on the OnlyFans platform is that there is kind of already this connection that you know, a person who's browsing content is feeling with the content creator, right? And a big part of the appeal of OnlyFans is that here is not just porn, but porn that you know, that invites you to get a direct line of communication with the person in it, which is very, you know, which is really appealing in a lot of ways, I think, for a lot of people. So the idea is that it's not just that you can see this person naked, but also that you might be able to contact them. And the way that messaging works on OnlyFans is usually that a content creator will encourage or indeed request that if you want to send them a message, that you have to tip them and pay them money.
But I think the question is then, where does AI play in this? So could you have would there be difference if the messages was as simulated as the sex?
And I mean, yes is the answer. People get chatters and chatbots to do this work for them all the time because, like Lizzie was suggesting, this kind of chat work, which is, you know, engaging somebody in a conversation, flirting, hanging out, like basically building a connection with them, it's really hard to scale it would take a really long time for somebody to host individual text conversations back and forth with every subscriber if they had thousands of them all wanting to
So
chat.
at what point do you think this goes from being healthy sex to really, really sad?
I'm not sure it is sad. I feel like there's
Talking to a bot.
Well, what do people feel about talking to a bot? Because you've spoken to people who know that it's synthetic or that it's not the person themselves. How do they feel about it?
I feel like the automation of the bot and the chat botness, that the idea that some of this chatting
bot.
Indeed, maybe a lot of the chatting is outsourced to various, AI companies or AI technologies and chatters that do that work for people. I feel like it's just another kind of layer for a subscriber to negotiate, because what is at the beating heart of OnlyFans is people wanting authentic connections with their
authentic
porn stars.
Automated connections with
so
AI.
It's if the idea is that OnlyFans stands aside, holds a special place in a sea of pornography. People talk about OnlyFans and they say things like, why would you pay to see somebody's nudes when you can see boobs on the internet for free, right? The idea is that it's offering something special. And something authentic and this kind of connection. And I feel like that the way AI plays into that is that, you've got a whole huge porn landscape on the internet. Then you have OnlyFans, which is a small part of that. Then you have the small part of OnlyFans that is actually like a person on the other end of the line. And where the real person is potentially up for debate. But I feel like there is an understanding, at least with subscribers, that yes, they are going to receive automated chats. They're going to interface with chatbots, and somewhere in there is a real human. And I feel like the journey and the quest to find a real person and to make a real connection is kind of part of its appeal.
Not exactly the holy grail, but it is a quest. Can I just round out the conversation by asking you, what do you think, with all this and your observations, is this a model for the broader internet where people aren't doing porn? Like, is there a world in which this is a model for how we negotiate new marketplaces? It seems to me to be the opposite to an Amazon model, for instance. So is there something there?
Yeah, or sort of similar to an Etsy model,
Yeah. Look, to be honest, I think if only, right? Like we were just talking before about generative AI's impact on musicians. What if musicians could, I'm aware that musicians do set up subscription pages, and I know that there are other platforms that, of course, are not porn related at all. Like platforms where people can subscribe and pay money directly to creators. It's taken off in a really specific and really like intense way, I think, with porn. But yeah, there's a part of me that really wishes that the good parts of OnlyFans would translate to other industries, including things like music and craft and creations and creativity, and sometimes like even journalism. The idea that OnlyFans is a platform with no advertising that completely relies on people who are absolutely prepared to spend money on content that they believe is good content or better than, that they can find for free elsewhere. Like, imagine that, but applied to, a journalism model, for example. Like, people don't want to pay for news. And look, a lot of people...
Some do, in fairness.
Sorry, Dan.
I feel like I have to just say one more quick point on this, because I think I broadly agree with you. I think this is a really welcome development, but it is worth noting that moving away from the advertising model, which is mostly for the good, I think we would all agree, but it does also kind of create more and more of the niche audiences and the groupings as a result of that. So, I saw this at The Guardian. There was a point where all of a sudden we were making more from our readers than we were from advertising. And look, our journalists would never have compromised themselves, but, from a commercial point of view, I was looking at this and going, well, the temptation is just to appeal to that base, right? And write more and more content for that progressive audience and trying to get them to support you with more and more revenue. And look, The Guardian genuinely has a church and state divide where someone like me would never be allowed into the newsroom making decisions for commercial reasons. But plenty of other media organisations I've worked with don't have that line. And so this is, I guess, just the very small downside that perhaps goes with what you're suggesting, is that this kind of niche audience acceleration, if you like, and not appealing to the mainstream has some downstream consequences as well. Sorry to finish on a low note, Peter.
It's all right. I respect your downsides. Look, are there any last thoughts or reflections? I feel like it's time for all of us to go to bed. But thanks, Emily. A really interesting conversation. And Lizzie, thanks for bringing Emily along. The two of them met each other, or I don't know if you met, but were on the panel at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas last weekend. So these ideas
I would love hearing from you, Emily, because I just think it's such a fresh take. Most people associate particularly sex work online as being this dark, nasty space full of people who are exploited and miserable. And there's certainly
can be that.
Exactly. So that's certainly one truth. But there is also other realities. And I think those are underexplored because they're not useful to politicians or other people holding power to put forward their ideas. So it's nice and really refreshing just to hear someone who's genuinely committed to good research, trying to understand the concept without judgment. And then that's the foundation, I think, for good policy making and kind of better conversations about these topics.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Yeah, and I think the good thing about this conversation is that actually it's not about, it's about reflecting what works on that platform and encouraging us who are all trying to think better ways of doing this stuff, how there are other alternatives. So thank you.
Of course. Yeah. And, like OnlyFans, again, it's not a shining beacon of everything going good in the world. But what I have found is that there is potential on OnlyFans for fun and for pleasure and, yes, for ethical porn. And that potential, I think, really excites me.
On that note, thanks, everyone. We'll be back in a fortnight. Don't know, we've got on a journey from AI companions to OnlyFans, so God knows what the journey's taking us to next, but I'm all up for it. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
That was Burning Platforms, brought to you by Capita's Centre of the Public Square. It was recorded on August 27 and produced on Narmland by Rebecca Connell. Talk again soon.